are listening to the Slash and Cast Podcast Network.
In the conclusion to our two-part NXIVM cult series, we'll talk about some of the victims of Keith Raniere and the DOS program. We'll also discuss the severe punishment and some of the conditions that occurred within the DOS secret society in the NXIVM cult. We'll also talk about the branding ceremonies that many of the women had to go through, and in addition, we'll talk about the women that came forward and brought down the NXIVM cult. Finally, we'll discuss the trials and sentencing of various NXIVM cult leaders, including Keith Raniere, Allison Mack, and Nancy Salzman. Welcome to another episode of the Cabinet of Dr. Mystery. I am your host, Dr. Mystery.
I tried to create living zombies.
Reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
God, give me strength.
All I got to do is relax, and they'll take me to their death.
Last chance to evacuate Earth before it is recycled.
This is a wicked, wicked world.
We are all evil in some form or another.
Last time we spoke, we were talking about the different stripe paths and the different sashes that everyone would wear. Briefly, just to recap what we had discussed, we talked about how different members in the cult were ranked in a little hierarchy system, and they would get, I believe it was 3 or 4 stripes on their sash in order to excel to the next level, the next color level. So if you haven't listened to the last episode where we really dove into the history of the cult and the stripe path and certain programs within the cult, you should really listen to that episode first as we dive into the history of the NXIVM cult and its leaders. So today, I just wanted to talk about a few of the leaders and what color sashes they would wear. So we talked about how Keith Raniere would wear a white sash because he claimed he was still a student. We also discussed how Nancy Salzman would wear a gold sash, and the gold sash was reserved for her, for the prefect of the NXIVM cult. In addition to that, her daughter Lauren Salzman, she wore a green sash with 4 white stripes. Allison Mack wore an orange sash with a single white stripe, and Sarah and Claire Bronfman wore green and orange sashes respectively. So we talked about Jeunesse and the SOP, but in addition to those 2 courses, the cult had a whole university where people would enroll to further themselves within the group. So these are just like the tip of the iceberg, just a few courses we'll discuss in a second here. And NXIVM ran many, many courses, and sometimes you'd have to take the courses repeatedly. So you'd have to take them again and again, and it was almost like you were taking it again to refresh your mind about, the brainwashing that you had just experienced. So this is just a tip of the iceberg, but here's some of the courses. Anatomy of Mind Body. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. Ethologia. And I have absolutely no idea what this means. I looked it up, I looked into it, and I still have no idea. Another course was Human Pain. Another one was The Source, The Knife, Reverence, Ascension, Ethicist Week, Compassion of Humanity, and there were many more that are listed, but those are ones that I thought I should really highlight here. Compassion of Humanity, says the guy, or the guy's teaching this course, and he's talking about branding women and beating women and all this sort of stuff. Compassion of Humanity. Keith nailed it with that one. There are, like I said, there are many, many courses that they offered through the university, through the ESP programs, and 2 courses that I found really interesting. I found 2 course titles that were really amusing, given the allegations against the cult and its founders. One title for a course was Traps. Okay, traps. We're gonna discuss trapping. I'm not sure if that was discussing how to make a trap or discussing that the cult was not a trap, because as we said before, some of the mantras and some of the course titles were actually like, NXIVM is not a cult. Another that I found really interesting was titled Breach of Ethics. So Keith and the other leaders of this cult would teach the breach of ethics. If you ask me, that's a pretty high horse to be up on. A very diluted sense of self. When you're blackmailing women to sleep with you and embezzling money, and you teach a course about the breach of ethics. I'm not sure if Keith really understood what he was doing there. So let's talk about the ethicist course. This program was all about becoming a martyr. That's essentially what it was. The program taught that Keith was your God and you should worship him and sacrifice yourself for him. And, Keith referenced himself as the ethicist. This being the case, he created the ethics for members to follow. So the whole idea of the course, after watching a couple documentaries and reading up on the ethicist course and other courses like it, the idea was that you should become a martyr for your God, and your God is the one who creates the ethics for this community, and in turn, he is called the ethicist. Like we were talking about in the last episode with readiness drills, the readiness drills were that call to arms, and we're going to talk about it again here. I'm not sure how much I touched on it in the last episode, but I believe we'll talk about it a little bit more in a little bit. One thing that we really did talk about is how Keith would refer to himself as the vanguard, and he wanted others to refer to him as the vanguard of NXIVM. There was a thing called Vanguard Week, which was more commonly known as V Week. And this was essentially a summer camp, or like a summer retreat, and it celebrated Keith's birthday. Originally, the woman who had created it, she was Keith's girlfriend at the time, and she was working with NXIVM, and she had created it as kind of a corporate retreat, so that all these different branches from all over the world could come together and, celebrate their NXIVM revival of self, right? This self-awareness, and they could have all the different chapters from all over the world come together for this corporate retreat. But it turned out, it turned into a celebration of Keith's birthday, the Vanguard Week. This corporate retreat, it saw, like I said, it saw NXIVM groups from across the world, and they came together for water sports, triathlons, plays, talent shows, music lessons, writing programs, chess programs, and many more things. They had all these different events packed into this 1 week, and I believe it was only 7 days. On the final night of the week, every group would perform a skit or a musical number that they've been practicing this for months, and it was basically each group had a different tribute for Keith for his birthday. So all of these people come together, and what they're doing is, they have this summer camp, this summer retreat, and they have all these different organizations and all these different people from all over the world, but they're all there for one purpose, and that's to celebrate Keith and his birthday. And that's what we'll see again and again, is that Keith has this he's just this guy who, deep down, he's lonely, and he has this weird sense of self where he doesn't feel like he belongs. And you see that all of this, the women that he entraps and the members that join NXIVM, the whole point of it is to praise him. And you see that, that is a really poor sense of self, that you do not love yourself, or you do not, you need all this external validation. And that's something that you see throughout these episodes, is that there's something wrong with Keith. There's something wrong with the way that he perceives himself and the way that he values the validation of others over the validation of himself, right? I should have put a little disclaimer at the beginning of this episode, but, we're a few minutes in. I'll do it now. We're going to be talking about, in just a second here, we're going to be talking about some cruel experiments. We're going to be talking about some sexual assault. We're going to be talking about branding and violence towards women. So, if you're squeamish and this isn't something you want to hear, then maybe you should turn away now. But like I said in the last episode, it's important to talk about these things. And I know that I list the show as a true crime and comedy podcast, and it is. We do have fun and we make jokes, and there's some episodes that are hilarious that I will listen to myself and I will laugh at, and my friends will laugh at, and we have a really good time when I have guests on the show and that sort of thing. And there's episodes like this one where you could probably make fun of different things, right? You could probably poke fun at Keith and you could have a good time with it, but it's really a serious subject. So, I might make a few jokes here and there, but yeah, this isn't one of the funnier episodes, I don't think. We're really talking about how this guy manipulated, I think it was like 18,000 people. What we're going to talk about next is some cruel experiments by Dr. Brandon Porter. Now, when we begin speaking about Dr. Brandon Porter, we see a lot of similarities between him and groups and secret experiments like the secret CIA MK Ultra experiments, which you can listen to in our archives. We have a really long, in-depth episode about the CIA mind control experiments. Really twisted, really messed up, like just inhumane experiments that the CIA conducted on American and Canadian citizens. The similarities that we see, it's not in terms of drugging the victims. That was a lot of the MK Ultra experiments, was they were testing out LSD and different hallucinogenic drugs while torturing these people or while experimenting on them. So we don't really see the aspect of drugging these individuals in the NXIVM cult, but we do see the similarity in terms of showing the subjects of your experiments, or Dr. Brandon Porter's in this case. They show them dark and disturbing imagery. Dr. Porter would show specifically women. He would show them terrible, terrible images of people being slaughtered and being assaulted and being mutilated. And he would display these images of blood and mutilated body parts. And he would show them as, he would show these images as a way of experimenting on these subjects. So we see these sadistic experiments, something like what we would see in the works of fiction, like A Clockwork Orange. When he has his eyes pried open and they're putting the drops in his eyes and they're making him watch these scenes of violence, right? Now, when he would do these experiments within the NXIVM cult, the Dr. Porter would use these caps, and they would put these caps on the subject's head, and these caps were supposed to monitor the electrical signals in your brain. So when you picture this, these women I picture them as being strapped into the chair with their hands. And the idea is that these women have these big electrodes hooked up to almost like a shower cap on their head. And, these wires are going out into this machine, and they're supposed to be picking up electrical signals in your brain for him to, do his little experiments on. These experiments, they were all filmed, and they were filmed specifically, they were filming the women's facial expressions as they saw the images presented on the screen. The women weren't allowed to stop at any point, which makes me believe that they were strapped into the chair. They were required and forced to watch the full grotesque programming. The final scene in this macabre display of violence, blood, gore, and assault, the final scene was of Mexican cartel members murdering and dismembering multiple Mexican women, with the cartel members holding the severed heads and calling the women whores. So the whole time, these women are just being absolutely annihilated with images of violence towards women. And Dr. Porter is recording the electrical signals in their brains. And that's his experiment. Dr. Porter is going the way of Joseph Mengele at this point. He's just shy of experimenting with sewing bodies together and messing around with experiments with twins and their DNA and trying to alter their DNA. It's just mind-blowing to me that we can see these comparisons between MK Ultra and NXIVM and Joseph Mengele, and it's all thanks to Dr. Brandon Porter, this absolute sadistic monster. And I'm not 100% sure. I should have looked this up before I had discussed him, but I'm pretty sure he had his license revoked. But I really, really hope that he did, because nobody that is nobody that takes the oath, the medical oath that you need to take to become a doctor, they should not be doing these sorts of experiments. Nobody that takes that sacred oath to become a doctor and to help people should be doing sick and twisted experiments like this. So in addition to this grotesque display of images on the screen that the doctor would subject them to, he also used medical experiments. He also had other medical experiments that used sleep deprivation, mind control techniques, hypnosis, and neurolinguistics to manipulate the members of the NXIVM cult and the members that were participating in his experiments. So as you can rightly imagine, many of the members of NXIVM that were experimented on and were put through these, aggressive experiments and straight up torture, a lot of them experienced mental breakdowns and required serious therapy to return to some semblance of normalcy. There was one woman who had said that she was participating in these experiments, and she said she broke away from wherever she was sitting, and she lost her mind. She started ripping out her hair. She started screaming. She started going insane. And at one point they had to take her and remove her from the facility and put her I don't know if they put her in a home or if they put her in an apartment, but they removed her from the facility, and, they needed to segregate her or remove her from everything so that she could just be alone and deal with everything that happened. And, I'm hoping that this woman sought therapy and is dealing with her issues. I believe that she is, because she appeared in the documentary that I watched, and she was also in another interview that I watched as well. And there are a lot of people, a lot of women specifically, that were involved in these experiments. And even if they didn't, get so aggravated to that extent, they were still all impacted. And things like this can give people PTSD, right? And it's just crazy to think about that we're as a society, we're still conducting these experiments on people. It's just absurd. It was all pseudoscience, but all of these people that were in NXIVM, all these people doing the experiments, conducting the experiments, they believed in it. And they believed that the NXIVM cult leaders could cure Tourette's and other illnesses like OCD with different cult programming. So in our last episode, we talked about NLPs and neuro-linguistic programming, which they're the same thing, but NLP stands for neuro-linguistic programming. And we talked about how it's not something that's new to NXIVM. It's something that a lot of people have been studying for a while. And it's basically this idea that you can change people's behavior with the way that you analyze successful people's behavior and the way that you speak and act to these people. So, there's a lot of hypnosis and manipulation and a lot of this, just manipulation, just fucking with people's heads. And that's what we see, too, is that these different cult programming that they use, they would claim that it could cure different illnesses. And it's really, they're just fucking around. They claim that they're therapists, they claim that they're doctors and scientists, but they're really just idiots who are trying to mess with people's heads. And in the case of Keith Raniere, trying to get them to love him, trying to get them to stay with his group or with his cult. And like I said before, it's all about Keith. It's all about Keith, and it's all about praising Keith. Before we dive into the DOS society within NXIVM, this secret cult sex slave society, we should discuss his victims, as some of them weren't members of DOS, and the assaults and deaths that we're about to discuss, they occurred before the group DOS was created, or at times they occurred outside of the group DOS, or at times they occurred outside of the group DOS itself. The first victim that we need to discuss is Gina Hutchinson. Earlier in the series, we mentioned that Raniere had sexually abused multiple 15-year-old women. In August of 2002, one of his victims that were 15 years old at the time when he assaulted them, her name was Gina Hutchinson, and she was found dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Another victim was Kristen Snyder. Kristen had attended multiple ESP, or Executive Success Programs, and had claimed that she was pregnant with Raniere's child. One day in February 2003, which I believe was shortly after, within 6-month period of attending these ESP, ES programs, Kristen left a suicide note, directly blaming NXIVM for turning off the emotions in her brain. It's claimed that she kayaked out into a river and overturned her kayak, drowning herself, although her body was never found. So a lot of people speculate that Kristen was actually murdered, whether it be by members of the NXIVM cult or members of some other organization that NXIVM hired. But some people have claimed, there are rumors, that Kristen Snyder was actually murdered and the suicide note and everything was, a cover-up of her murder. Because remember, her body has never been found. Now, one victim that we're going to discuss in great detail is India Oxenberg. The reason we're discussing this in great detail is because India has discussed this in different newspaper articles, all across the media, different interviews, and in documentary. So India Oxenberg was introduced to the group through her mother, Catherine Oxenberg. She recommended India to try the ESPs. At 19 years old, India quit school, starting a business in the culinary arts. She believed that the courses at NXIVM would help her build her business in the culinary arts. She believed that joining these programs at NXIVM and these different courses, that they could help her build her business in the culinary arts. In the beginning, in India's specific case, taking these courses was a way to bond with her mother over the 5-day program that she first joined. The duo drove to a house in Venice, which was supposedly owned by Eric Clapton. And now, as we've seen in the past with other similar cults like the Children of God, shortly after the very first seminar, India was separated from her mother. And the leaders, again, we see this a lot, they stated that they always separated family members. So for those of you who've listened to the COG episodes, the Children of God episodes, this separating of family members, it allows leaders to manipulate individuals easier, and you have less influence from your family members. So in the COG, in the Children of God, what they would do is they would take children, and they would take, let's say for example, it was a man and a woman, and what they would do is they would remove the children from that home. So if it was a man and a woman with 2 children, they would take one child, move them to a different family, take the other, move them to another separate family, and then they would take the father and they would move him to a completely different family that had nothing to do with his children, and they would take the mother and move her to a completely different family. And then they would pair them up with different people, right? With different families, with different partners. And it was all so that you don't have anything. You just have the cult. You just have, in this case, NXIVM. So we'll see as we go through, especially in India's case, they really removed any sense that she had family, that she could rely on her family. NXIVM was your family. What they would do, you could use India's case as an example. What they would do is they would rope you in. They would make you spend all your money on going to the NXIVM programs. They would make you work within NXIVM, and they would discourage you from working outside of the cult. And a lot of the work that you did within NXIVM wasn't paid. So it's really compelling to me. We live in this society where everything is about money, 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 money. And you have this cult where they're saying, come work for us for free. It'll count towards your journey on the stripe path. And the sheer hold and the sheer power and mind control and the manipulation, that the power that they held over these people it's just mind-blowing. This program that India and Catherine joined, it saw that on the final day of the program, you were required to learn how to give Keith tribute. And Nancy Salzman, she got word that Catherine and India Oxenberg were in the program, and she made a special appearance. Again, these cult leaders see high-profile targets with money or influence, and they do anything to rope these people in. So Catherine Oxenberg, she's a famous actress. She's been in, I believe she was in a soap opera. She's been in, the public eye for a really long time. And her mother is a royal family member, so that in turn makes her part of the royal family. And I believe it's Yugoslavia. I'm not 100% sure. Again, I probably should have looked that up, but I'm not really concerned about Catherine at this point. And I said this in the last episode too, is that the NXIVM cult, they would see high-profile targets like royal family members, Hollywood elites, directors, actors. They would see these people and they would target them and they would try to get them into the NXIVM cult because, one, they know these people have a lot of money to spend, and two, if they have more of these people, more famous people, celebrities, entrepreneurs within their ranks, then it gives more validity to the cult itself. In our last episode, we talked about practices that the cult would perform that were very similar to auditing that we see in Scientology. So within these cults, a lot of different cults, we see this, but within NXIVM, the leaders, they tear people down in order to build them up into the type of followers that they desire. And we really saw that in the Children of God cult, and we see it in a lot of different cults. In the case of India and Catherine, this is exactly what they did. They brought these two women in, and they pinpointed stressful situations and stressful events that happened in their past, and they found out exactly what affected them directly so they could bring about revolutionary breakthroughs. I'm going to say that in quotations here. I got air quotes going on. They brought about these revolutionary breakthroughs, and they could potentially use this information in the future, right? So it's another way for them to blackmail or manipulate these women in the future. At this point, both women, India and Catherine, they were enthusiastic about these breakthroughs. Quote unquote breakthroughs, and eventually the whole family began joining the seminars. Like we previously said, Catherine hosted some Jeunesse seminars at her home, and this propelled India to continue her studies within the cult. As she and many other women put it, they began developing friendships and found other women within the group that they could relate to. And this made them feel that sense of belonging, community, and security that we see all over various cults across the world. And you could look at it from a similarity or a similar standpoint as, when you go to a new school and you become enveloped in the community around your school, or you go to a new community event and you become enveloped in that community, and you feel that sense of community regardless of what it is. And you feel that sense of community and camaraderie depending on, regardless of where it is and what it is, you still feel that sense of connection to people, right? And that's what these groups did. That's what these cults do. And that's what NXIVM did, is they brought all these people together and they made them feel like they were serving a purpose. And that's what a lot of people are looking for in life, is something to hold on to, is something to belong to. And NXIVM and Jeunesse offered these women that opportunity, that sense of community. India eventually delved further into the cult, and she became a coach for the group. So this meant devoting a significant portion of her time to the organization, and upon the suggestion of leadership, she distanced herself from her mother and other family members. And this process, what Nancy Salzman would call this process, is individualizing or individuating. The idea is that Catherine had invited her mother to attend one of the Jeunesse seminars, and her mother didn't like it. Catherine, in turn, started to look at the group a little bit differently, and as far as I'm aware, the only member of the family that continued within the NXIVM cult was India. India had been roped in to this sense of community, the sense of belonging, and she had really been sucked into the NXIVM cult, and she rose through the ranks. Not that she was a high member, she wasn't a high-ranking member, but she was a coach, and she started developing more and more of a connection within the NXIVM cult. And they said you need to separate yourself from your family and join the NXIVM cult full-time and pledge allegiance to us, basically. In February of 2012, an expose Catherine read revealed that Keith was an alleged pedophile. Claims that Keith had molested women as young as 12 years old prompted Catherine to leave the group and abandon any further courses. So at this point, Catherine said, "I want nothing to do with this group at all," and India was already too far gone. One woman, known only as Camilla, stated that for 12 years, Raniere expected her to be on call for sexual encounters 24/7. Camilla's father and oldest sister are still within Raniere's current group of supporters, and her sister actually gave birth to one of Raniere's daughters. The remaining members of her family testified that Raniere had sex with at least 3 different members of their family. Today, I am going to be going old school here. I'm going to be snacking on a Great Western Brewing Original 16 Canadian Pale Ale. It's a classic. It's a classic beer. It's something that a lot of my family members always default to when they're sitting around the campfire having a beer. So, yeah, I guess I'll just crack it open and enjoy. So when we're discussing the NXIVM cult, and especially when we're discussing how the downfall of the NXIVM cult, we need to look at Sarah Edmondson. Edmondson? I believe it's Sarah. We need to look at Sarah Edmondson. Sarah is a Canadian actress from Vancouver, BC, and she's appeared in numerous films and television shows, including Scary Movie 4, Big Nothing, and Psych. In October 2017, she told her story of her time in the DOS cult, which we'll dive into in just a second here. She told her story of her time in the DOS cult to media outlets, and many say that her media appearances, along with Catherine Oxenberg's media appearances, they really triggered the downfall of Keith Raniere and the downfall of NXIVM. And Sarah was really pivotal and really she was a big part of taking down the NXIVM cult and exposing the DOS cults and the DOS cult and the different things that went on within NXIVM and within DOS. And, at the end of the episode, I will name drop her book that came out that she wrote. And it's a really good book that you should take a look at if you're interested in the NXIVM cult and you're interested in learning more about Sarah Edmondson's life. And, we didn't really use it as a reference for this episode or the previous episode, but it's a really good book and it's well worth the read. And again, I'll drop that at the end of the episode along with a couple other books that you could read if you wanted to learn even more about the NXIVM cult and about DOS and the various victims and women that were affected by DOS and NXIVM. So you're probably wondering, what is DOS? I've mentioned it a few times in the last episode and a few times in this episode. What the hell is DOS? What is this guy talking about? So DOS is an acronym. Let's see if I can pronounce this because my Latin is not very good. Dominus Obsequious Sororium. So this Latin phrase, it loosely translates to Lord or Master of the Obedient Female Companions. There's actually like a specific translation from it, but that's the idea. So the idea is that this DOS cult, this secret cult, is Keith's sex slave cult. Upon entering the cult, the women that were interested in joining the cult, it wasn't a program, it wasn't a course, it was pitched as a course, it was pitched as more of these programs that everyone would join where they would learn about, basically they were brainwashed, but it was pitched as one of these programs, one of these elite courses. Keith has claimed to kind of separate himself from the DOS cult and to protect his celibacy, this idea that he's celibate and he's a perfect, angelic, holier-than-thou human being. He's kind of tried to separate himself from the DOS cult, but not to give anything away, but there's no way Keith can separate himself from the DOS cult after some of the things that we'll talk about later in the episode. So when these women would enter the cult, they were required to hand over nude photographs and other sexually explicit materials, which the leaders would threaten them with. They would blackmail them. So they would say, if you will release these nude photographs and explicit materials, should any information about this secretive group be revealed to the public, should any of you try to leave, should any of you try to go to the authorities, should any of you leak any private information, we will plaster your nudes and your sexually explicit materials. Basically, they're blackmailing them. They're saying, we will ruin your life and your livelihood and your careers if you leak any of this information or you go to the police or, you leave this group. So it was this very secretive, selective group. And as we go further into this discussion of the DOS cult, we'll see that it was another idea for Keith to have this MLM marketing, this pyramid scheme. So like I said before, the women in this group, they were Keith's slaves. They were his sex slaves. And they were required to go through an initiation where they would lay nude on a table and they would repeat the phrase, "Master, please brand me." They were then branded with a cauterizing pen, like a cauterizing pen. So for those that don't know what a cautery pen is, it's a surgical tool that's used to cauterize or seal a wound. So a lot of times in movies and in history, you'll read or you'll see that what people would do is they would heat up a knife, they would heat up a knife to cauterize a wound, to burn the wound and seal it in to stop the bleeding or whatever. So these people were using a cauterizing pen or a cautery pen to basically draw and cauterize and put this brand on these women. Now, one thing that you'll see in all these books that you read and every article that you read and documentaries that you watch, you'll see that the branding was actually Keith's initials. So it was actually KR. The women believed that it was a Roman numeral symbol that they just had never seen before or whatever it was. And, it was a Roman numeral symbol and the women just took it as, for face value because they believed Keith and they trusted the cult or the NXIVM group and the leaders within the cult. And they especially trusted Allison Mack. Now, we'll talk about her in just a second here. But what happened was the initials were KR, and if you look at it, you can even see that there might be a little A, and I believe that Keith's middle name starts with an A, so there was a KAR. That's what some people see. Other people just see the KR. The DOS group, it was a pyramid scheme, like I said, and it was basically a pyramid scheme of sexual slaves. So someone like Allison Mack, she was a first-tier slave with other lower-tier slaves underneath them, and Keith was the ultimate, quote-unquote, grand master of the slave women. Now, I really don't like using the word slave, but I'm not really a huge fan of using the word slave, but that's what Keith called them. That's what the women were called within this group. One thing that I found really interesting was that Keith actually taught courses about practicing enslavement. Now, I haven't dug too deep into this, but I haven't dug too deep into the topic of enslavement and the teachings that he did about enslavement, but just the idea that, he's teaching these courses on ethics. He has a ethicist week. He calls himself the ethicist, and now he's talking about enslavement. Like, these are all warning signs that they should, more than red flags. Like, when you're in a relationship and you see different things that you're like, oh, that's kind of weird, trust that feeling. Trust that instinct. If you're with someone and there's something about them that strikes you as odd, obviously give them a chance. Some people like myself were kind of weird. I'm sure that it weirds people out when I tell them I have a true crime, cult, weird alien conspiracy podcast, that maybe that's a red flag. Just mark that and keep going and see if there's any other red flags. But you should obviously give people a chance and get to know people. I'm not saying the first sign of something weird, bail and run away. I'm just saying if you feel like there's something really wrong with the person that you're with or someone you've started to see, maybe trust that instinct. Before we go any further within the episode, we should really discuss Allison Mack. So Allison Kristen Mack, she's one of the group's top recruiters. Allison was part of the inner circle of NXIVM, and she's also an actress, most known for her long-running stint on the TV show Smallville. She also played Amanda, a reoccurring character on Wilfred. I don't know if you've seen Wilfred. It's a really good show. I've watched the British version, but I actually, in this one case, usually I prefer the original English version, but in this case, I prefer the American version with Elijah Wood and Allison Mack. And Wilfred is basically, in the series, Elijah Wood sees this dog, but it's not a dog. It's a man in a dog suit. So everybody else sees this cute little puppy, and he sees this old, slobby, stoner, sex-crazed man in a dog suit. So it's a really fun series, really funny to watch, and I believe Allison Mack plays his love interest. She's also appeared in other movies and shows like The Ant Bully and Seventh Heaven, but her most prominent and well-known role is the role that she played on Smallville. Allison was born to American citizens in Preetz, West Germany, where her father, who was an opera singer, was performing at the time. After 2 years of living in Germany, they moved to California. And in India's case, when we talk about India Oxenberg, Allison Mack required her to be her slave, where Allison was the master. So this woman, Allison Mack, she had this whole background behind her. She played different characters. She had a successful career. She was on Smallville for the entire program, I believe, which was a really long-running series. And now she's joining the NXIVM cult. And if you watch videos of Allison Mack, you can see how deeply she really believes in Keith Raniere, Nancy Salzman, and the NXIVM cult. So with India being Allison's slave, Allison required absolute obedience, where India was required to ask for permission to do anything in her life. That included what she could eat, what she could wear, where she could go, and the things that she could do. And a lot of the time that India was within the cult, she spent a lot of time with Allison. And at one point, she actually lived with Allison in her apartment, I believe, which was in New York. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm pretty sure that's where they lived together. And India and Allison lived in the same apartment together. So you have this person that you trust, this woman, that you really learn to love and to trust and to believe that everything she's asking you to do is valid or valuable for your career. You're trusting her wholly and completely. And she is literally using you like a slave. She is literally telling you what you can eat that day, what you can wear, the things that you can do, where you can go. Allison convinced women that in order to overcome their fears and, their general sense of being uncomfortable, that they needed to seduce Keith Raniere. Many women were required to provide some proof of their encounter with Keith, such as a nude photograph or a video. And in the documentary that I watched, India, she was required to be with Keith, and he got her to sit nude on a bed, and he took photographs of her while she was nude sitting on the bed. And that was to prove to Allison that she had gone through this seduction practice. Now, again, going back to our Children of God series, we saw members in the cult, in the Cog cult, they took nude photographs and videos and they sent them to David Berg. Now, Allison would also do the same. She would take nude photographs of each of her quote-unquote pod members, each of the people that were underneath her, and she would send these photographs to Keith. And eventually more sexually explicit materials were submitted to Keith, and all of this compromising material was, like I said, essentially blackmail to keep these women within the cult silent. A lot of it was that it wasn't just sexually explicit material. It wasn't just nude photographs. A lot of what they had to do was on a regular basis. So these women would be forced to make things up. They would be forced to say, well, what's something that happened in your past? Did somebody abuse you? Is there something that you lied about? Is there someone in your family embezzling money? Because a lot of these people that were in the cult, they had enough money to pay for the cult. So that means that they were either influential, or they had money themselves, or their family members did. So these women were required to write things about their own family that would be compromising, that would keep them within the cult, right? So some people will say, fuck it, it's a nude, right? But other people will not want to have their entire family dragged down with them, right? So a lot of the compromising material was just stuff these women made up. They would just type up a little quick essay, make something up, make it sound believable, send it to them. Send it to Keith or to Allison. The women were told that sending these confidential documents, these sexually explicit material, that it was making them a better person, that they were overcoming their fears of being vulnerable, and these experiences were making them into a better version of themselves. So sometimes when they're doing these readiness drills, or they get a call to action to send a nude photograph or to send some compromising material. A lot of times it was you have a minute. So if you're driving, if you're in a meeting, if you're in an interview, if you're with someone else, with your friends, you would have to go to the bathroom or pull over to the side of the road and take these nude photographs or send them something explicit or something controversial or something that's compromising. And they would want it now, immediately. As I previously said, women in the group were required to assault each other with objects such as wooden paddles. Some women were tortured and forced into extreme BDSM acts. Some of these acts were that they were locked into cages, they were tied to suspension bars, they were handcuffed and shocked with dog collars, and some individuals are into BDSM sex acts, which are completely fine and completely normal. As long as everything is consensual, everything is, you have a safe word, everything is done safely, you're practicing these BDSM acts in a safe and consensual manner. The difference is that these individuals that practice these BDSM sex acts, they have safe words. They'll develop procedures for caring for their partners that are involved in these acts, and they will make sure that they care for each other and take the time afterwards to make sure everybody is okay and everybody is cared for. That's how you perform these acts in an appropriate manner, with everyone's consent, with safe words, and with caring and loving, practices afterwards. In Das, the woman had these compromising photographs, and Keith had such a hold on them that there were no safe words, there was no escape, there was no caring afterwards. It was just torture. That's all it was. It wasn't BDSM, it was just torture. Around 2016, the Das group began ramping up their enrollments, which meant that they needed to recruit their own slaves. So Keith had this image of thousands of slaves in Das that would be submissive to him, even hoping that he would enroll women of influence who could have a hand in something like political society, going so far as to hope to influence the presidential elections. So not only does he need to have these sex slaves bow to him and worship him and always be at his beck and call to do whatever twisted and demented practice that he had envisioned in his mind, he was thinking of having almost like a Manchurian candidate, like having these women be like his secret spies that could influence the president and could change elections and have this great influence over society, like they're like the Freemasons of sex, and it's just something. It's something out of a book, it's something out of a movie that you would never think would actually happen in real life. So just to go back to this branding, because it is a big part of all the news stories, it is a big part of why the cult fell apart. The branding was a form of ultimate commitment to Das, and it was in a ritualistic ceremony, and the woman entered into the bedroom fully naked, and Allison would read a ceremonial scripture written specifically for the ceremony. So the women, like I said, they would be laid nude on the table, and they were held down by their fellow cult members. And Allison and other first-tier slaves, or, masters, because they would be kind of both since they're first tier, because they would be recruiting other people below them. So it was this pyramid scheme of sex slaves that they would recruit. So they would recite the following. The best slave derives the highest pleasure from being her master's ultimate tool, independent of use. The best slave derives the highest pleasure from being her master's ultimate tool, independent of use. And like I said, the initials that they would brand, KR, for Keith Raniere, they were cauterized into each woman's skin. The smell of burning flesh, the searing pain, and utter anguish revealing itself as the woman being branded would scream and convulse. As the strokes of the pen burned into their pelvic area, Allison would repeat the following words. Feel the pain, feel the love, feel the pain, feel the love. Your greatest joy is to surrender completely. All things in all ways, I surrender my life, mind, body, and possessions for unconditional use. So, in our last episode and the beginning of this episode, we really see that the NXIVM cult brings members in, it takes a hold of them, it alters the way that they think, it changes their mind and their perception, and it takes away any critical thinking, any part of you that's going to question what Keith is actually doing here. And we see that in the DOS cult, this is the ultimate commitment to Keith, to NXIVM, to DOS. This is the ultimate commitment. Once the news got a hold of Harvey Weinstein? That guy's a fucking asshole anyway. Harvey Weinstein and the Me Too movement, more and more women came forward with accusations against NXIVM and Keith Raniere. Seeing what her daughter had gone through, and hearing about it from other people who had left NXIVM, Catherine Oxenberg went on a crusade to rescue India from the cult. Catherine appeared on numerous talk shows and in various news outlets to get more and more attention to the cult in an attempt to get India out. Keith made India write a public note on Facebook that stated she was happy, safe, and where she wanted to be. Keith also released his own public statement that DOS and NXIVM were not related and that he had no part in the DOS cult. Once it became public that NXIVM was being investigated by the U.S. District Court, Keith fled to Mexico. Like we said before, a lot of people that were in a lot of people that were in NXIVM were from Mexico. A lot of the women that joined the Jeunesse program, they were from Mexico. So we see that Keith still has this connection to Mexico, and he fled there once he knew that he was in trouble. Stupidly enough, Keith had so much confidence that he ordered several of his closest supporters to his villa in Mexico. Get this. This is why he ordered them there. He ordered them there to perform a group blowjob to show their loyalty. This guy is such a fucking idiot. He claims that he's the smartest man on the planet. This guy is Einstein reincarnated, but he's like a combination of Einstein and the Dalai Lama. And he's so fucking stupid that he invites all of these women to his villa in Mexico because he wants to get a BJ. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's the whole reason they found him. Nikki Klein, who was one of his close, sex slaves, I don't know what to call her at this point. Nikki Klein was part of his inner circle, and she was one of the women that he invited down. So Nikki had posted an Instagram photo of her in Puerto Vallarta, and that's how the Mexican police found him. She posted this image of her on a very popular, I believe it's a sculpture, some sort of art piece in Puerto Vallarta, and that's how they found where Keith was because of Nikki's Instagram post. And I believe, fucking douchebags. Why are your cars so loud? I believe that at one point Nikki Klein married Allison Mack, and I'm pretty sure it was in order for her to be able to stay in the US. But Nikki made this post on Insta, and that is what led the Mexican police to find Keith Raniere. So when they found out where he was, they kicked down his door, and they found him, the great, the almighty Keith Raniere, hiding in a closet, cowering like a scared puppy. Keith was arrested and sent back to the U.S. to face charges. In total, 15 women came forward with statements of how Raniere used brainwashing techniques to manipulate and abuse them over multiple years. Allison Mack was arrested and indicted on charges of sex trafficking amongst other charges. Claire Bronfman, who we were talking about, I believe in the last episode, we talked about how she basically funded the entire NXIVM operation. She was charged with racketeering, and her bail was set at $100 million. Nancy Salzman also had her house raided, where they found hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I believe they were hidden in plastic bags all over her garage. Along with Nancy's daughter, they were both indicted on charges of racketeering conspiracy, wire fraud, and labor conspiracy. Dr. Brandon Porter, the sadistic, fucking psychopathic doctor who was conducting those insane fright experiments where we talked about earlier, where he had basically put on this shower cap that was hooked up to wires, and he was monitoring women's the electrical signals in women's brains as he showed them these brutal, graphic, violent images. So he was charged with 25 counts of medical misconduct, and he did have his license revoked. Rightfully so. We don't need any more Joseph Mengelas. Maybe we'll cover Joseph Mengele in a future episode, but damn. Both Brandon Porter and Joseph Mengele, they are just fucking monsters. The medical license for Dr. Daniel Roberts, who conducted many of the brandings with the cauterizing pens, her medical license is still under review as of 2021. So Dr. Roberts defended her role in the branding of these women, and she stated, "They wanted it, they were laughing." Now, to me, that sounds like the defense of a sexual predator, right? That sounds like the defense of someone who sexually assaults someone and is in denial. They wanted it, right? That's like when a woman is wearing a short skirt or a low-cut top, and these men try to justify sexually assaulting her or raping her, and they say she wanted it because she was wearing this kind of outfit. It's fucking stupid. Nobody wants to be sexually assaulted. Nobody wants to be raped. Nobody wants to be branded with a fucking cauterizing pen. And the idea is that, like, if these women did say yes, if these women were laughing about it, they were under the impression that it wasn't going to fucking hurt that much. They were under the impression that it was going to be this tiny little brand the size of a quarter. I don't think any of these women knew that it was going to be a half hour to an hour of agonizing, brutal pain. I've had a tattoo before. I know that pain of dragging a needle across your skin, right? I had a stick and poke tattoo. Those are painful things. Having a cauterizing pen burning your flesh, searing somebody else's initials into your flesh over like a half hour or an hour period. That sounds fucking painful. And it was painful. These women can attest that it was not what they were told it was going to be. Now, another thing is, if you look at this from the perspective that these women were manipulated, which they were, they had all these mind control techniques. They were experimented on. They had neuro-linguistic programming that they were subjected to. It doesn't matter if they were laughing or if they said yes, they were not in their right mind to agree to this. Her license should be revoked. It should absolutely, unequivocally be revoked. That is my opinion, but I think it's the correct opinion. I think the whole concept of having women, like having a prepared script where the women asked for the branding in the script. They were told, read this script, and in the script you will ask for the branding. I think that's what she's referring to. But again, I don't think that brainwashing, blackmailing, and coercing people into doing something, I don't think that qualifies as them, quote, wanting to do it or wanting to have it done to them. These women didn't have a choice. There was no option. There was no safe word. There was no escaping. They did not have a choice in this branding being part of the DOS cult. There was no choice for these women. They didn't want to do it. They had to do it. There was no other option for them. Because remember, the second that they said no, they could release these crucial, controversial documents, these naked photographs, these sexually explicit images. There was no choice for these women. One thing that was really lucky, I don't know if it's lucky or if it's something to be thankful for, but India Oxenberg, she found flash drives, USB drives containing spreadsheets, photographs, and audio recordings of Keith orchestrating the DOS cult. Now, in these recordings, Keith was heard sketching the stencil for the brands that were burned into these women's bodies. He was also heard in recordings orchestrating the DOS branding rituals and talking about gathering collateral. So in these recordings, Keith was heard talking about the procedure, talking about the script, talking about the ritualistic ceremony. So this whole time, Keith is saying, DOS is separate from me. DOS has nothing to do with me. DOS was people within my group doing something that I didn't know about. But India had the evidence. India was finally free of the, well, I shouldn't say that, because going by the documentary and articles that I've read about her, she is still very much struggling with the cult and reclaiming some sense of self and some sense of independence. When she was finally free of the NXIVM cult in terms of them not having a hold over her anymore, she found these, and she was also being indicted because she had recruited members into the DOS group as well. That was part of her job. That was part of being in the DOS cult, was to recruit others. And I know for a fact that India regrets even bringing anybody into the cult, but the matter of the fact is that she did, whether she was, she was coerced, she was blackmailed and manipulated, and it's unfortunate, but she did bring people into the cult. So she was being charged, but she agreed to work with the authorities to bring down NXIVM, DOS, and Keith Raniere. And she found these flash drives that I believe that Allison Mack had asked her to hold on to, and she used those in the court of law to prove that Keith had every bit of a role in DOS as Allison Mack and everyone else. Just to wrap up the episode here, let's talk about the trials. Let's talk about the sentencing. Let's talk about how much time everyone had to serve. Claire Bronfman, she was sentenced to 81 months in prison and ordered to pay a fine of $6.5 million. Nancy Salzman faced up to 20 years in prison at one point. Currently, she's facing 33 to 41 months in prison. And as I'm writing this, last night, I believe, her sentencing is on September 8th, 2021, right? So that would have been 2 days ago. So 2 days ago, as of recording this, she was sentenced to 42 months. She was sentenced to 42 months, which is the equivalent of 3 years in prison. Lauren Salzman faced up to 40 years in prison, but she was sentenced to 5 years of probation. Allison Mack was sentenced, Halo, sit the fuck down. Allison Mack was sentenced to 3 years in prison on racketeering charges. At one point during the trial, the judge interrupted Raniere's attorney, stating, quote, "Intent does not matter when a 45-year-old man sexually abuses a child." So that's just one phrase that really stuck in my mind when I was reading about the trial, is that when Keith was saying, or Keith's lawyer was trying to defend him, the judge got infuriated and shouted that at him. Another thing that really stuck in my mind at the trial was when India Oxenberg said the following, quote, "You are a sexual predator and you raped me. When you touched me, I recoiled." On Tuesday, October 27th, 2020, Keith Raniere was sentenced to 120 years in prison for sex trafficking, child pornography, and numerous additional charges. The 60-year-old Keith Raniere was also ordered to pay over $1.5 million in fines. The crazy thing is, as of today, as of recording this, NXIVM supporters still practice readiness drills. And we talked, I believe in the last episode, it might have been earlier in this episode, we talked about the readiness drills where you were on call. You had to answer these texts within a minute. So one of your leaders would text you, "ready?" ? And you would have to say ready. And I think I compared it to Waco. And it's kind of this call to arms that anyone that's within the cult, they have to be ready to go to war, basically. So as of today, they still, his remaining NXIVM supporters, they still practice these readiness drills. In July 2020, a group of NXIVM loyalists They organized a dance group beneath the window of Keith's prison cell. So, the NXIVM cult was taken down. Keith Raniere was taken down. A lot of the people within NXIVM have been sent to prison or have paid millions of dollars in fines. But it still exists. There are still supporters. And that's the crazy thing to me. After all of this, these people still believe that Keith is looking out for them. They still believe that the government is after them, the media is after them, and people are just jealous because they don't understand this freedom, this ultimate release that they have being in the NXIVM cult. I really hope that you enjoyed this series. I know it's difficult to talk about these things, but like I said at the beginning of our first episode in this series, it's important to talk about this stuff. It's hard to deal with it and it's hard to talk about, but I bet I can only imagine how difficult it is to actually live through this and go through these things and be assaulted and have these things happen to you. But it's important that we don't let this stuff become the past, that we continue to talk about it and we continue to advocate for people who experience these things, and we continue to try to prevent things from happening in the future like this. Again, I hope you enjoyed this series. I hope I could bring a little bit of light to it and we had a little bit of fun. And even if you did not have fun, that you learned something from this and you're going to walk away from this knowing, okay, maybe I will not join that cult. But, if you're looking for further reading, I would suggest Captive by Catherine Oxenberg and Scarred by Sarah Edmondson. Those are some really good reads. Those are books that you should check out if you want to learn more about the cult, if you want to learn more about what these women went through specifically. This episode is produced by Death Hotel Creative, hosted by myself, Dr. Mystery. To view more and to grab your exclusive Cabinet of Mystery merch, visit us at notwhatwesay.com. You can check us out on Instagram at Cabinet of Mystery or our Twitter at Open the Cabinet. Please leave us a review if you enjoyed the show, and let us know what topics you'd like to hear in the future. You can hit us up either on the socials or at cabinetofmystery@gmail.com. If you'd like to leave us a voice message and appear in upcoming episodes, leave us a voicemail at anchor.fm/Cabinet of Mystery. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe or follow for more episodes.